good afternoon and good evening to everyone joining. Welcome to our latest Collaborator webinar. We're going to be looking at Collaborator and Azure DevOps, and we're looking particularly at some new integrations that we've built into the product. So in the studio today are myself, Dermot Caniff. I'm the one on the right-hand side. I'm a solutions engineer at SmartBear, based here in Galway in Ireland. And with me in the studio is Damien Walsh.
Hi, hello everybody. I think we've just put on the camera there now, so I hope we've got the makeup on.
I forgot my makeup.
Did you see us out?
Yeah. Hi everyone. Yeah, we just have some housekeeping to cover. So we're open to questions, absolutely open to questions, but we would request that if you have questions, you put them in the Q&A interface, which should be available at the bottom of your Zoom window. We'll be doing a section near the end about where we will open it up to the floor, and we'll try and answer some of the questions that have been raised. The chat is mostly for feedback. So for example, we might ask if you can hear us, and you might fire your responses into the chat box, and that would be very much appreciated.
Yeah, so if you can hear us and you can see the screen, that's always important.
Exactly. And the last thing to cover there is that this session is being recorded, and the links to view and download the video will be made available around about 24 hours after the webinar has been broadcast. Okay. So Collaborator, as many of you will know, is part of SmartBear's product portfolio. It fits nicely in the area of review and governance and planning and management around all of your software. So basically, we have a lot of products near the left-hand side of this slide here that kind of play a critical part in all of the stages of your software development lifecycle. So even though you might focus a lot on some of the functional testing tools within your test phase, a tool like Collaborator can easily play a part in your design phase, in your building phase, in your test phase, and also even deploying and monitoring. And the same goes for other products such as Cucumber Studio, Zephyr, Swagger Hub, etc. And that's really where it fits in our product portfolio. So what we're going to be covering today, we'll talk a little bit about peer review itself, where it fits in your quality assurance paradigm and how important it is, and the reasons why we do it. And then we'll talk specifically about the integration, the new integration with Azure DevOps. And I'll run through a demonstration of that integration as well, and then we'll take a gap at the end for questions and answers. Okay. So yeah, the first thing to cover is the importance of peer review. Damien, is peer review important?
Very, very, very important.
Absolutely. I think we've all been in situations where we've had critical items of code that needed to be delivered, and maybe some corners were cut and peer review wasn't conducted. And, you know, issues happen. Defects get into production. Even if they don't, it certainly impacts your confidence about the code that you've delivered into production. Okay, so peer review is a way of reducing the amount of defects, certainly. But as it says on the slide, you own your process. If you are conducting peer review and it is part of your culture, you have confidence over the entire process. You have confidence that you've done your due diligence around releasing your code. And also you can measure your success. So if you have a process around peer review, then you have the ability to collect metrics on how well your software delivery works. You can keep track of the amount of rework that you need to do. You can keep track of the amount of time you spend in peer review before you release. And these metrics can help you to chart an improvement in your software development lifecycle.
I think you're right, Dermot. I think, we talk to people day in, day out. I think, when you said it, confidence, we've talked about, bug fixing area on the life cycle. We talked about it, success, measuring success, all that kind of stuff. But if the end user hasn't got the confidence that they're finding bugs, when they click on a link, or even legacy systems, they're going to not want to use it more frequently. They're going to be looking for other options, and again, it gets a bad reputation. The software, and we need to build that confidence, and that's a key thing nowadays, especially how quickly we're moving. Whether we're moving from legacy systems to more kind of AngularJS systems or whatever, it's important to kind of have that confidence of the end user.
Absolutely, and what you don't want at any stage in your software development lifecycle is surprise. You don't want it to be kind of a constant bugbear to deal with in your process. So you don't want to be surprised at how long it takes to implement code in your build phase. You don't want to be surprised at how many defects you find in your test phase. And you definitely do not want to be surprised by a defect in production.
And maybe we've got a poll or two coming up, but maybe to put the question out there, of those that are doing, are looking to do peer review, why?
Indeed. Yeah, it would be good to get people's answers around that.
Again, so some of these chats in there, you can make them public and people can see and, can set up those conversations out. But again, that's just something I'd like to understand, is why, individuals or companies want to do peer review. Is it because they want to fix defects quickly? They want to have a process in place? They've been regulated? Is this to measure success of the application? What is it?
Mm-hmm. Or auditing is another thing we hear.
Auditing, yeah, regulated, yeah. So it's again, and don't be shy. We don't. All questions, all comments are good.
Absolutely. Okay. So, on the subject of finding defects, one of the topics that we talk about a lot with customers is the idea of shifting left. So, for those who don't know, shifting left refers to your test effort. So when we analyze software delivery, we find that for traditional models of development, the vast majority of defects are injected during the build phase, because you're defining, the software, and that is literally where code gets created. So rough analysis here, according to Jones and Capers, indicates 85% of defects are injected into the code that's being delivered at the coding phase. And that makes sense.
That's quite a lot, isn't it?
Yeah, absolutely. But if you think about it, when you start doing unit tests, functional tests, and system tests, the code itself is relatively stable.
Yes,
so updates don't happen in quite such an intensity. So then when you talk about defects being found in traditional models, again, where you've got very hard divisions between your phases, you end up getting less defects, or nearly no defects found during coding, more defects found in unit tests, more in functional tests, more in system tests, and then a massive drop off at release time.
So maybe to add to that as well, when we put out the question about why do people do peer review, Aaron certainly said, around code quality and sharing of knowledge, and that then will reduce the percentage of defects found at the coding level. If you've got good code quality, good process in place, and also share that knowledge, that they do something once that caused issues, that they don't do it again. So again, that's a good point.
Exactly. And it has a bearing on the shifting left paradigm as well. As we look at costs when you find defects, so the cost of finding a defect is 4 times in unit test is 4 times what it would be in coding. Now, what these graphs don't show is the defects that are generated out of design. So you can have defect by design, basically a flawed design that works its way through all of the phases. But just as a rule of thumb, we're starting at coding, and the costs, as you progress, it increases essentially logarithmically towards release.
I like your big word there.
Logarithmic.
Yeah.
Yes. You try and use that in a sentence today. Okay, so the idea of shifting left is taking the bulk of your test effort and moving it leftwards in this graph and more towards the coding phase. So as we increase the amount of effort earlier in the phase, the idea is that we would find more defects earlier and we would reduce our costs for fixing those defects. And ultimately what we're aiming for is to apply testing principles during the coding phase as well. So we reduce the amount of defects that we inject at the outset, and we also reduce significantly the cost of finding any of the defects through any of the phases throughout our development process. Okay. So all of that is as a way to say peer review, definitely something that you should at least consider, and we would definitely recommend implementing it in some way, shape, or form. Now, how you implement it is entirely up to your organization, your requirements, etc. But one tool that can help you with this is Collaborator. Collaborator has been on the block for quite a while now.
And an old hand, yes.
Yes, absolutely. And there's an awful lot of customers that we have, large scale customers in a lot of different industries that use Collaborator in order to help assure their software quality throughout all of the phases of their SDLC and through to release. Now, one of the requests that we got a lot from users over the past year or two was an integration with Azure DevOps repositories. So up until now, Collaborator has been able to integrate with a huge amount of source code management platforms, older ones such as CVS and ClearCase, more modern ones like Git. And I suppose a lot of our customers had been moving to Azure DevOps as kind of a unified platform, including Azure DevOps repositories. So they were hoping that we could integrate Azure DevOps integration with the source code management component of that. And over the course of the last year or so, we've been working on that, and now it is integrated as of version 12.3.
Is it?
Yeah.
Yeah.
So that's the most recent release. So the idea here is that, like any of the other source code management tools, we can integrate and we can base our peer reviews based on changes that we make in our source code. Also, like some other managed Git services that we use, certain events that can happen on the Azure DevOps repository will or can be configured to trigger reviews automatically within Collaborator. And those reviews can be blockers for integration, for merging of pull requests. So that's handy, obviously. If you want to make the review process mandatory, you can just tweak a setting in Collaborator and say, block merging of this pull request until such time as the review has been passed. Okay. So the idea here is that on Azure DevOps, we might make a branch off of our master branch here, and we make updates to the files contained therein. And then we trigger a pull request on Azure DevOps, and the pull request automatically starts a review process on the Collaborator server. Now, you can configure Collaborator to default as many of the settings you want, and you can configure certain individuals or groups or review pools are all added review. So there's a lot that there's very little work to do before you are allowed to actually enter into your review process. So,
yeah, I think that's becoming quite a common thing now, Darren, especially in peer reviews. It's kind of the automation of a review and bringing everything in and bringing the teams in as well. And I think that's something that we're seeing quite a lot more of.
Absolutely. And obviously nobody wants to spend a huge amount of time doing admin work before they can actually do the work itself. So as much as you can automate around the process, the better. Yeah. Especially if it's a repetitive process that you know yourself when you're walking through a repetitive procedure, you think, couldn't a computer do this? And it usually is the best approach is to automate what can be automated. Now, obviously, there are areas that you can't automate.
Exactly, yeah. Not everything can be automated.
Exactly. So anything that involves kind of subjective analysis, you can't automate that. You need human beings to do that. But whatever can be automated, especially with collaborator reviews, is put in place there. So your webhook automatically triggers a review. The review can automatically pull in the people who need to be participants into that review process. And you can, as I said, you can make merging of this branch into master contingent on the process of completing your review. So, I mean, you can override it, you can bypass that, but primarily what we see customers saying is that I don't want code to get into my master branch until it's been reviewed and passed by the peer group in my development team.
Yeah, and some of the audience out there have said that is they want to make sure that there is a process in place to make sure the quality of the code is up to standard. Exactly. And that's I've heard that's got that comment from a few people.
Mm-hmm. So to that end, let's have a look at Collaborator.
So should we run a bit of a poll?
We've been talking about Azure DevOps. So what we'd really love to know, and these polls really help us, like they'll help us on this demonstration for starters, because it'll help me to know where you're at with regards to Azure DevOps, with regards to peer review. And also it'll help us building further webinars in the future, because it's handy to know where your audience is at so you can pitch the content correctly.
Yeah, like this particular integration has been driven by the end user, by the market trend, by what we're seeing. So your input into how our development and how our product evolves is down to feedback from you. So again, these kind of polls will help us with that.
Okay, so what we're asking is, if you're using Azure DevOps today, I imagine lots of you are, if you're logged on to this particular webinar. And the second question is, what's your current issue tracking application? And yeah, there's an awful lot out there, so we added in another just in case. But also this sort of information gives us an idea of what kind of integrations you might be using if you were using Collaborator. Okay.
Yeah, well, it's interesting. I'm seeing ups and downs, and wow.
Yeah, we've got a few votes coming in. And
yeah, I suppose then the chat then, for those that, are people moving to Azure DevOps? Are people, thinking about it? Are they in a transition phase? For those that have said no and things like that, just curious as well.
Absolutely. So yeah, feedback in the chat, questions in the Q&A box. We'll let the poll run for another few minutes if you want to add some additional information. There's still a few small number of people who are yet to vote, so maybe you're thinking about it, and we'll leave it up there for you to add.
Don't be shy.
Contribution. Exactly. Don't be shy. We won't bite.
It is. It's one of these things, as Dermot says. Azure DevOps has certainly exploded. Originally was TFS, but I think now all of a sudden this has exploded into kind of something that's being used quite an industry.
Absolutely. So I'm just pulling up Collaborator here, and before we actually see the integration in action, I just wanted to take a quick peek behind the curtain. So typically, when we configure our repository integrations, we go to the admin section, we go to the repository hosting services section here, and you can configure connections to remote systems. So that includes GitHub, GitLab, Bitbucket, and on-premise Bitbucket. And now, as of version 12.3, it also includes Azure DevOps Git. Okay, so the way we configure that is that we set up the repository URI, and we give our login details and everything. We can specify branches to track and to ignore. There's this setting here, which is require status check, and this is the one that enforces that we complete a review before we can merge our PR back into master. So if I could set it to false or true depending on my requirements. As I said, a lot of our customers have requested that we could set this to be a blocking thing on their merge process. So that's why that is there. And then we can also tweak what happens when a review is completed. So if we complete a review, do we automatically complete a pull request and auto merge? Or we can do that and we can delete the branch after us, or we can just do nothing. So I might leave it at do nothing just for illustrative purposes. Similarly, when we cancel a review, we could also cancel the PR, but that's entirely up to you. Now we can also, if a review has been closed, we can automatically open it if something happens on that PR as well. So for example, if I added this, any new pushes to the PR would automatically reopen the review. And even comments we can set to automatically reopen the review as well. So you can sync up your interactions with the PR with your interactions with the review, and that'll be reflected in the review that you see. And then we also have the ability to tie this review and this PR completion process to the addition of a signature. So just to give some background, on Collaborator, you can require an electronic signature in order to show that you assent to the completion of a review. And that can be handy, again, in a regulated industry where audits are concerned, that you just have that ability to have an extra level of validation and confidence on your review closure process. Okay, so once you've set up your integration with Azure, the next thing to do is to make sure that your users get automatic access to the review when they're making changes or making PRs on the repository. So in my user preferences, so we go through users and we go to my specific user, you go to the remote accounts tab, and then for every integration, every SCM integration and every issue tracking integration here, we have the ability to add a username for that service. So in this case, we have this link to my Azure DevOps repo, and I've just added my Azure Git username here. And once that's added, my user on Collaborator is now linked to whatever I do on Azure DevOps. Okay. So once that's all set up, and I go back into Azure DevOps, we can see I'm just accessing a repo here. I've created my own branch, which is Dermot's branch. I've taken one of the files and I've made updates to it. And Azure quite helpfully offers me to, asks me if I want to create a pull request. So in this instance, yes, thank you, Azure DevOps. I want to create a pull request. So once we kick that off, pull request is created. I'll add my and the necessary items in order to create the pull request. And then once I hit the create button, we go back to our PR view and we can see Dermot's branch into master. The event is created by Dermot. And then after a small amount of time while the two systems are communicating with each other, we get this additional step here, which indicates that Collaborator says a review for this pull request was created, and we have a link to the review. Okay. Now, if I wanted to say, oh, I don't need review on this, we can look up here on the policies and it says required. This review is still in progress. So if I go up here and I say, never mind that, I want to complete this PR, I'm being blocked from doing that because the review is still in process. And that's really handy, obviously. If you want to make sure that nobody bypasses your quality process, you can enforce that by configuring your integration from the Collaborator side. Okay. So if I follow my link, we go straight into my new review. So we're in the planning phase. And what we notice here, if I go down to the participants section it's automatically added me as author. And that's because I set up that remote account in my user profile. So it's recognized that a person called Dermot Caniff has created a PR, and it noticed that one of its users has the same username. So it's automatically added me as the author. And that kind of thing cuts down significantly on the amount of time you have to do in order to shove this review into the review domain of whoever's going to be participating. Okay. Now, it's asking me to supply a reviewer. You can configure Collaborator to do this automatically. So with subscriptions and with groups and with review pools, you can automatically subscribe all of these entities to a particular type of review or to a particular author's output of reviews, and automatically assign an individual, or automatically assign a team, or automatically assign a review pool. And just to articulate, a review pool basically is a collection of users that you can add to a review process. So if I added mentors, for example, as reviewers, that would mean that I'm not assigning an individual, but anybody in that mentor's review pool who sees this and has bandwidth can pick it up and say, okay, I'll be your reviewer. And then my requirement for a single reviewer on this review process will be satisfied, and we can proceed with the process.
So just going back as well, as Dermot talked through the kind of groups and the templates and things like that, one of the questions was around electronic signatures. What you can do is you can build the electronic signature capacity around the template. So again, if a review needs an electronic signature from a product manager or a product owner or the head lead architect, that will be incorporated into the template as part of that electronic signature.
Exactly. And that really is a massive part of the Collaborator tool, is that you have the ability to configure almost everything in your review workflow. So as an example, up here we have the template field, and we defaulted to this particular template. But if I chose this new workflow template, this is a template that I created based on my team's requirements. So if I apply that template here, you'll see that some of the fields change. So I've added custom fields to track specific things within my workflow. I've added a checklist, which reflects the prerequisites that my team requires. The participants and subscriptions can be based on the template that you use. And furthermore, all of this is configurable. So you have degrees of custom fields, you've got participant custom fields, checklist custom fields, and they can capture any of the information that you require to track as part of your QA peer review process. And additionally, you can also report on these values as well. So when we look at reporting within Collaborator, you can generate reports on individual reviews or across different reviews, and that can help you to track your progress based on metrics that are meaningful to you and your organization, and not just generic metrics like code defect density. Okay, so I'm going to add an individual in this instance as my reviewer. And once we add, we can see my prerequisite has been met. And then, as I said, we have participant custom fields. So I can set those. In my team, it is quite common when we have meetings to give our agreement or disagreement by giving a thumbs up or thumbs down. So I created a custom field, which is just a drop down with thumbs up, thumbs down, thumbs sideways. So I'm going to give a thumbs up here. And similarly, I can say what hat I'm wearing for this review. So I could say I'm a developer. And you can see in the remote system links, because this review came from an external source code management tool, we automatically have a link to the Azure DevOps PR. Okay, so that's a linked item. We also support issue tracking systems. So if I were to add this and I put in a reference to an external item, so I'm not sure what I have in that particular TFS system, but if we were to look at Jira, for example, and I put in some reference there, I can add a remote system link. And basically the Azure DevOps integration for issue tracking, that's going to be working in a similar way. Unfortunately, I don't have a connection to work items set up myself, but essentially it works the same way as the Jira one here. You're provided with a link directly to that item, and within the system that you've specified, there's a link back to your Collaborator review. Okay, so then we're into the chat section. The chat is just a way of doing kind of real-time communication or near real-time communication with other participants within the review process. So if I just add, it would be great if I could spell, Damien. If I add a comment in here, that can be made available essentially to everybody who's participating. And then finally, we have our review materials section. So we've got the updates, the commits on our branch are included in this PR, and they're listed here in the changes that have been recorded from our Git server. So in this case, we're looking at main.java, and we can see that one additional line has been added, one line has been changed, and one line has been removed. Okay, so now I've set up everything and I'm ready to move this into the next phase. Now, we have an annotation phase, and that's a way to facilitate meetings and face-to-face meetings about a review process. So that can be handy if you've got a round table process that you want to support. Collaborator can add as a sort of minute-taking tool alongside of your face-to-face meeting. But if you want to just conduct this business digitally, you can just move it into the inspection phase. And then that opens it up to the participants to make their own contributions. Okay. So there's a bit of traffic on the old chat box there.
Yeah, I've been busy while you were explaining to people, I was answering a few questions.
Awesome.
So keep them coming, everyone. Any questions you may have, either Dermot will answer them live and show them, or I can certainly point you in the right direction. So you've got 2 for the price of 1 here today.
Awesome. Okay, so I've sent that review over to my participant, whose name is Rudy, and I've now logged in as Rudy, as you can see here, and I can see down at the bottom, I've got this review. This is my Azure Git pull request. So once I open that and I scroll through, I can see everything that was set up during the planning phase, and I can make contributions to my checklist here. As I do that, you can see there's a timestamp and a user stamp here. That means it's part of the record now that I added these checklists and I assented to these checklist items. Okay. We can also update my participant custom fields. So I can set my thumbs up as well. And I can say maybe what category am I today? I'm a QA. And then further down, any of the new traffic on the chat is highlighted in yellow here. So we can see the initial comment is marked there. Now I can mark these as red, which takes away the highlight. Alternatively, I can mark it as accepted. So you could build that into your culture of reviewing. The difference there is that the acceptance has been recorded in the record of the review. So you could actually say, we don't proceed unless everybody accepts this. And there would be a record then, which any auditor or reviewer can trace back. And that enhances, obviously, the traceability of your code. So looking in the review material itself, we open up our Java file and we can see the side-by-side comparison here. Red are red marks removed lines, green marks added line, and yellow marks changed lines. Okay. Now for this, we can start a conversation on the file level, kind of an overall conversation. Or alternatively, we can click any of the lines here and start a conversation there. So That may seem like a fatuous comment, but I like to support my developers wherever possible.
Support's good.
Exactly. And we can also add defects. So if I say, don't remove this line.
And some of the audience are using the likes of work items in Jira and so on as well. So it's good to have that.
Mm-hmm. As of version 12.3 as well, we've got markup capabilities for these comments. So we can add emphasis if we choose. We can underline items and italicize items as and how we see fit. We can also do bullet points, and we can do other markup as well, so superscripts and subscripts, etc. So I can add this as a defect, and the fields here I have are severity and type. I actually decided on what my fields should be in my template. So along with everything else in the workflow, the defects that we raise, which signify rework that has to happen on the items that are being reviewed, we can decide how we report these and what we record about these. So in my case, I decided that I only wanted to record severity, and in my organization, we only ever have major or minor severity, and there's no in between, which is a fun way to live.
Just no in between.
And so the type as well, I've got this long list, so I can just pop in whatever I want there. And then once I've added that defect, we now have a red bug on the review material, which would need to be addressed by the author, okay? Now, up until that point, we could have completed this review as a reviewer. But because we added a defect, we now are required to send this to Rework. And that means that we just announce it to the author that something has to change. And then the author needs to go and make the change as required. So now if I go back into Azure DevOps, I can look at my files and I can edit that file. If I find the edit button, that would be great. Let's have a look. Okay. So I had, what was it? There we are. So I'm just making a change here. That's going to be committed. And we've updated the PR process. So this update now, if we go back into my review and scroll down to the items, we can see we now have an additional commit added to the file. And I can send this for inspection once more to my reviewer. The reviewer opens up the file section. And if they agree with the change that's been made, if they feel that it satisfies the defect, you can see here, new version uploaded with that signature. And now we can see if we're comparing the first version against the most recent version, we no longer have a removed line. Now I can change the versions that we compare here. So I could change that to be the second to last version, or no, that's actually the same one, isn't it? So we can look at the initial version, changed version versus the most recent one. So we can see I've just added an additional line, and then we can go back to the current to current, and then first to last. Okay.
So this is all stored in Collaborator, in the Collaborator server. So all these kind of new versions, this is nothing to do with kind of the repository that you're working on. Again, this is all kind of stored inside of Collaborator. So if you change 20 times this file, then it'll keep the history of that.
Exactly. And critically, the changes will be a matter of record and they'll be tracked, which means that if you need to keep an eye on it, if you need that level of traceability, you can tell the entire story from soup to nuts through your Collaborator reporting. So as a reviewer, I'm satisfied that this file is of sufficient quality, so I can mark that as fixed. And that means that I can send this particular review to completion.
But you can see how seamless the integration is between Azure DevOps and kind of Collaborator when you're doing a pull request. Once you create that review, everything that associated with those files. And we've just created one file that could be a branch, could be 20 different files that make up a kind of, login screen, for example. Anything that changes inside there will be tied to that review inside a Collaborator and will be updated automatically. And all the traceability, all the auditing will be captured inside a Collaborator as well.
Exactly. So I'm just going to sign it here. And yeah, so once that's, maybe I won't. But anyway, once you've completed a review, if we go back into Azure and go to our pull requests, and we look at the PR that I raised, if we look, we can see a history here. We've got the initial pull request being created and the review being created. Then we see the change that I made to satisfy the requirements of the review, and then corresponding review in Collaborator has been completed. And this means that this button now says that I can complete the review. And in our policies, our required step of review has been completed. So now if I complete that, we're then able to merge the change that I made directly into master. Okay. And everything, as they say, is fantastic. Okay, so in this way, the integration with Azure DevOps, it's bidirectional. It maintains itself relative to the latest state of the files contained within the PR and the latest activity on the PR. And then obviously you can, as we've shown, you can make it a blocking stage in your process. You can tie merging and updating of your master branch directly to your QA process, and you can involve all of your team or select members of your team in that peer review process as well. And it just takes kind of the extra effort out of the equation. So Collaborator will automate a lot of the peer review process. It'll allow for input from humans where input from humans is absolutely required, and it won't require humans to get involved in the grunt work of organizing all of that. Okay. So once we've completed a review, we have access to the review report. And the review report gives us metrics, standard metrics like review defects, elapsed time, defect density and inspection rate, but also it'll record any of the custom fields that we have added into our review process, as well as individual review reports. We can generate reports across all of the reviews in the system. So for example, if I wanted to just generate a report based on the line of code metrics and maybe some custom fields that I've added, we can run this report. We can also add filters also based on the custom fields. So for example, if I have a metric that is of particular note to my own industry, so in this case, maybe we've got this certification software level, we can tie particular values of that to our reporting. And that's very powerful. Obviously, we're not stuck with pre-cooked out of the box metrics. We can generate our own metrics relative to what we require in our own industry or in our own team. And then once I run that report, we get a full list of the matching reviews. These can be output to a file. We can also generate the SQL, which Collaborator uses to pull back this information. And that can be handy if you're going to use some sort of analytics platform. So for example, you could use Grafana or you could use Elasticstack to run this SQL against the Collaborator database and generate dashboards around that information. Okay, so we're coming up on about 15 minutes left in the...
The audience are quiet. They've gone quiet, Jeremy. You must have done a fantastic job on explaining the integration. Any questions from the audience? Does that make sense? Have people seen Collaborator before? Can you see the ease of use of the integration? a word we've kind of started using here in SmartBear is frictionless. Can you see that?
Mm-hmm.
And any feedback? Or is everybody just shy?
That can happen too, but
so
as we said before, we don't bite. So
no, it's Wednesday, so everyone should be in the middle of it, ready to go. But if you do have any, like, obviously, if you do have any other questions, the team are here, myself and Dermot, but please do reach out to us. Like, it's one of those things that, when you take it on board, when you have a look back through the recording, maybe when you start working with it, again, if you have any questions, just let us know. Obviously, we're updating this collaborator constantly, and it's constantly evolving. And that being, like, the example is Azure DevOps.
Exactly. Okay.
So should we go going once and twice and 3 times? That's any questions?
Yeah, absolutely. As Damien said, if you do have any questions, quite often I get on a webinar and I think of questions 30 minutes after it's finished.
Yeah.
So if that happens, just feel free to contact us, reach out to one of our sales agents, or just contact the company directly using our website. There's a sort of interactive chat function there, which will, if you raise questions there, more often than
I can give your personal email and your mobile number, Dermot, if you want.
Or not.
But look, there's ways of kind of contacting the team, and they're happy to help with any questions.
Exactly.
All right, folks. Well, look, thanks very much for taking the time out today. We do appreciate it. I know everyone's busy. And again, hopefully you got some sense of how Azure DevOps and Collaborator work very seamlessly. And hopefully we shall chat to you again.
Thanks, everyone.
Thanks, everyone.